Hi children, we continue with our 6th chapter, Combustion and Flame. In the last class we saw what is combustion and also what are the different types of combustion like rapid combustion, spontaneous combustion and explosion. Today we will see what are the conditions necessary for combustion to take place. What are the conditions necessary for combustion to take place? The first condition is presence of a combustible substance. If there is no combustible substance present, combustion will not take place. So, the first and the most important condition, one of the most important conditions needed for combustion to take place is presence of a combustible substance. There should be a material that is capable of combustion. A material that can undergo combustion should be present, otherwise combustion will not take place. Now, what is the second condition? Presence of the supporter of combustion. What is that? The supporter of combustion? That is oxygen. Presence of oxygen. Combustion take place in presence of oxygen. Presence of the supporter of combustion, that is oxygen. Combustion will not take place in the absence of oxygen. This we have verified in smaller classes like 6th standard we have learned it. Take a lighted candle, keep it on the table, cover it with a glass tumbler. Observe it. What happens? What happens to the candle flame? You can see that after few seconds the candle flame starts to flicker and finally the flame goes off. Within seconds the flame goes off. So, this activity shows that combustion will not take place in the absence of oxygen. Combustion will not take place in the absence of oxygen. So, if the clothes of a person catches fire, you might have seen people covering him with a blanket. Have you seen it? When the clothes of a person catches fire, he is seen covered with blanket. Why is it done? When he is covered with a blanket, oxygen supply is cut off. The oxygen supply is cut off and the flame or the substance stops burning. The cloth stops burning. The oxygen supply is cut off and combustion is ended. Okay. So, presence of the supporter of combustion or oxygen. In the absence of oxygen, combustion will not take place. Oxygen is needed for combustion to take place. Examples I told you, the candle flame goes off when it is covered with a glass tumbler. So, when it is covered with the glass tumbler, oxygen supply is not there. The oxygen that is inside the glass is used up. After that, the flame starts to flicker and finally it goes off. And if the clothes of a person, that's an important question. When the clothes of a person catches fire, he is covered with a blanket. Covering with blanket is done in order to cut off the supply of oxygen, so that the fire is extinguished. Okay. Now, the third one is heating the substance. Heating the combustible substance to its ignition temperature. Okay, heating the combustible substance to its ignition temperature. So we have to see what is ignition temperature. What is ignition temperature? Before that, let me ask you a few questions. Will a matchstick catch fire by itself? Will the matchstick catch fire by itself? No. Then how does a matchstick catch fire? Only when it is rubbed on the rough surface of the matchbox. You might have seen the matchstick being rubbed on the rough surface of the matchbox. Then how is the flame produced? Due to the heat of friction. Due to heat of friction, heat is produced and the matchstick catches fire. isn't it? So a matchstick will not catch fire by itself, only when it is rubbed on the rough surface of the match box. Due to heat of friction, heat is produced. Due to heat of friction, it catches fire. Then, will a paper catch fire when a lighted matchstick is brought near it? Immediately the paper will catch fire. Then what about a piece of wood? By bringing a lighted matchstick near it, will a piece of wood, big piece of wood, will it catch fire? No, it will not catch fire by just bringing a lighted matchstick near it. It catches fire with sometimes you have to bring paper or kerosene has to be added to it. Kerosene oil has to be poured to it. Then only it will catch fire. So what does it show? All substances do not catch fire at the same temperature. Isn't it? All substances do not catch fire at the same temperature. Some substances catch fire at low temperatures. Some substances like wood, they catch fire only when they are heated to a very high temperature. This lowest temperature, the lowest temperature at which a combustible material catches fire is known as ignition temperature. The lowest temperature at which a combustible material catches fire is known as ignition temperature. So the ignition temperature is different for different substances. Some substances have low ignition temperatures, some substances have high ignition temperature. So the substances which have low ignition temperature, they catches fire easily, like petrol, diesel, kerosene, etc. Their ignition temperature is very low, so they catches fire very easily. So their ignition temperature is low. Substances like wood on the other hand, their ignition temperature is high. So they have to be heated to very high temperature so that they catches fire. So different substances have different values for ignition temperature. Substances which have low ignition temperature catches fire easily. Substances which have high ignition temperature, they takes time. They have to be heated to very high temperature so that they catch fire. Okay. So paper, what about if you compare the ignition temperature of paper and wood, which one has low ignition temperature? Paper. When you bring a burning matchstick near it, paper catches fire, but wood will not catch fire by simply bringing a burning matchstick near it. We have to take the help of other substances so that the piece of wood burns. So wood has higher ignition temperature than paper. Then what about wood and kerosene? Kerosene catches fire very easily only by heating to a very little temperature, only by heating to a very little time. Kerosene catches fire, but wood takes more time. Okay, so kerosene has low ignition temperature. Now have you heard of forest fires? Forest fire is an example of spontaneous combustion. During extreme heat of summer, at some places dry grass catches fire. How? Because the ignition temperature of dry grass is very low. So the heat of the sun, extreme heat of sun is enough for this dry grass to catch fire. So from dry grass it spreads to trees, and within no time the entire forest will be on fire. We call it as forest fire. So we have to be very careful, and also sometimes due to lightning stroke, during lightning also temperature increases. So that much heat is enough for this dry grass to catch fire. So that leads to the fire spreads from dry grass to trees, and very soon the entire forest will be on fire. So it can be due to extreme heat of the sun or sometimes due to lightning stroke. But most forest fires are due to carelessness of human beings. So we have to be very careful. When you leave the forest after campfire and all, we have to see that the campfires are completely extinguished. After picnic and all, when you leave the forest after campfire, you have to see that the fire is completely extinguished before you leave the forest. Otherwise it can be disastrous. There are a lot of living organisms in the forest, animals and all. They may die Okay, so we have forest fire is an example of spontaneous combustion. During summer the grass become dry and the ignition temperature of dry grass is very low. So this heat of the sun or a lightning stroke is enough for this dry grass to catch fire. From the dry grass it spreads to trees, and within no time the entire forest will be on fire, and it is very difficult to control such fires. But most of the times forest fires are due to carelessness of human beings. So we have to be careful after the campfires and all. Before you leave the forest, we have to see that the fire is completely extinguished. Now in your textbook there is an activity 6.4. 6.4. I will read the activity. Make 2 paper cups by folding a sheet of paper. Page number 67, activity 6.4. Make 2 paper cups by folding a sheet of paper. Pour about 50 ml of water in one of the cups. Heat both the cups separately with a candle. What do you observe? So, using paper, make 2 paper cups. Just fold the paper and make 2 paper cups. In one of the cups, you add 50 ml of water. Then heat both the cups with a candle and see what happens. Which cup burns first? The paper cup without water. You can see that the paper, this you can do at home in the supervision of your parents. So the paper cup without water will catch fire. What happens to the other one? In the paper cup where water is taken, what happens there? The heat that is given, when you are heating it with a candle, heat is given to the paper cup, isn't it? In the paper cup that is empty, the heat given by the candle is, that heat is enough for the paper to catch fire. The ignition temperature of the paper will be attained and it catches fire. What happens in the other one with water? The heat that is given to the paper cup will be transferred to water by conduction. The heat that is given, supplied to the paper cup will be transferred. Conduction you have learned. From one material to other, heat is transferred. So, the heat that is supplied to the paper cup is transferred to the water inside it by conduction. As a result, what happens? The heat is conducted from the paper cup, the heat is conducted to the water. So, paper will not be attaining its ignition temperature because the heat given is transferred. So, it will not attain its ignition temperature. So, the paper cup without water burns, it attains its ignition temperature and it catches fire. The other one will not be attaining its ignition temperature because the heat that is supplied to this paper cup is transferred to the water inside it by conduction. So, if you continue like this, sometimes you can boil the water that is inside the paper cup. It will not, that ignition temperature will not be attained and it will not catch fire. And also, you might have seen, you take a frying pan, add oil to it. Taking a frying pan, adding oil to it. You are not adding anything, heat it. But you are not adding anything, any food items into the pan for cooking. What will happen after some time? You can see that the oil inside the frying pan catches fire. Why? The frying pan is made up of metal. From the heat that is given to the frying pan, metallic frying pan is transferred to the oil by conduction. It is transferred to the oil. As a result, what happens? The oil attains its ignition temperature and it catches fire. Instead of that, if you are adding something for cooking, the heat that is given to the oil, that will be transferred to the food item so that it get cooked. So, if you are not adding to oil that is taken in a frying pan and heat it, you can see that the oil catches fire because the heat that is given to the frying pan is transferred to the oil by conduction. So, the oil attains its ignition temperature and it catches fire. I hope it is clear to you. Now, there is one more term, inflammable substances. Have you heard of inflammable substances? In trucks and all you might have seen written highly inflammable. What is the meaning of that? Substances that catch fire very easily are called inflammable substances. So, the substances which have low ignition temperature, the substances which have low values of ignition temperature, substances which have low values of ignition temperature and catches fire easily with a flame, they are known as inflammable substances. This is an important question. Examples are LPG, petrol, diesel, alcohol, etc. Okay, so the substances which have very low values of ignition temperature and hence catches fire easily with a flame are known as inflammable substances. So the trucks where this highly inflammable are written, they are used to transport this type of substances from one place to another, highly inflammable. So low ignition temperature, so such substances catches fire very easily with a flame. Petrol, diesel, kerosene, LPG are examples of such fuels. Such substances, inflammable substances. So what are the conditions necessary for combustion to take place? First one, presence of a combustible substance. If a substance, combustible material is not there, there is no question of combustion, because combustion will not take place. And then next one is presence of oxygen, supporter of combustion, that is oxygen. Without oxygen, combustion will not take place. That's why when the clothes of a person catches fire, we cover him with a blanket to cut off the supply of oxygen. Last one is heating the combustible substance to its ignition temperature, the lowest temperature at which a substance catches fire. Only the temperature is attained, a substance will burn. If that temperature is not attained, the substance will not burn. Different substances have different values of ignition temperature. Some substances have low ignition temperature, so they catch fire easily. Some substances like wood, they have high ignition temperature, so they have to be heated to high temperature so that they attain their ignition temperature and then they burn. Okay, so these are the three conditions necessary for combustion to take place. All those activities, examples given in the textbook you have to learn. And finally, what are inflammable substances? That's all. Thank you, children.